What if I told you that the monies that they are collecting in tax revenue are not always being used for services? They're taking some of the money and investing it. Stay tuned to learn more.
Open your eyes.
Hi, welcome to the Nothing Is As It Seems podcast. This is episode 6. My name is Mark. Welcome to the show. Today we're going to be discussing a conspiracy that some have called corporate governance. I first found out about this about 15 years ago, and I found it to be one of the more difficult conspiracies to get discussion going. Couldn't get anybody to talk about it for the longest time. So now I have my own podcast and I'm going to talk about it. And I think the reason it's so difficult for people to wrap their heads around or even consider it is this conspiracy represents a paradigm change. The paradigm that all of us have been taught and the paradigm that is the de facto belief system of the vast majority is what I would call the scarcity mindset paradigm. So whether you acknowledge that paradigm or not, you believe in it, you don't believe it, not even aware of where you stand with it, I think most of us are aware that one of the favorite plays of the bad guys, they love to play games with the supply demand. They love to create fake scarcities. They know how to manipulate markets, and they have all kinds of tricks in their bag, whether it's limited liability systems like insurance or credential systems like the AMA, and they limit the supply and drive up the price. And there's probably a million different ways that they know how to do it, right? Not earth-shattering information. If you extrapolate that out further, we're taught from a very young age this scarcity mindset in things that I believe are meant to scare us. Overpopulation is an inevitable problem that's going to result in the crash of civilization. We're running out of arable land, even though we have a golf course in every other corner, and we have private jets zooming through the air from millionaires. Speaking of that, we have the carbon situation. I was taught when I was a young kid that the ozone layer is depleted. We don't hear that very much anymore, by the way. And we're taught about no fresh water, not enough fresh water, etc., ad nauseum. So, some of it may have a ring of truth to it. I'm not here to argue that. But the point of the matter is that we're taught this mindset. It becomes ingrained in us. It becomes part of our firmware. And then when something like this comes out into the light, it's very difficult to accept, even for those that may identify as, we'll say, truthers. Bottom line, it's disconcerting to have information come out that shatters a paradigm and a particular belief system. So keep that in mind as we move into the discussion. The first thing I found out 15 years ago is something that many probably already know, that your government entities have become corporatized. States, cities, towns, districts, counties, courts, townships, all of it. All of your government entities are now legitimate corporations that file corporate paperwork with the state, file annual reports, the whole 9 yards. And many already know this, but many stop when they get to this point because the bombshell is next. If you were to go to a town meeting where you live, and there was a budgetary discussion, the chairman of the board or whoever is in charge will bring out the budget. They'll go through it. They'll say, we were short by $10 million last year. We need to increase this. We need to cut that. We need to do this. Except for one thing, that budget is only inclusive of the tax money in and the tax money out from that given year. And come to find out, this is just wild. There are two sets of books. Every corporation, whether it's your local town, city, state, I've already gone through some examples of those, and there's many more, files what's called a CAFR. That's short for Comprehensive annual financial report. Now, according to these CAFRs, and listen, you have to go back years for some of them to see this laid out because they've now covered up most of the information. The CAFRs are much more obscure now than they used to be. But here's the point. They take the tax money and they invest it. I'm talking about stocks, bonds, real estate, cash investments, foreign currencies, precious metals. Nowadays, they probably invest them in crypto. Who knows? These investments are not a part of the budget. They're not a part of the money that's coming in and the money that's going out. There's a completely separate set of books for that. So before we even get to the improprieties, like the transfer of ownership from public to private or corporate, and the conflict of interest, and the crazy manipulation of the markets that this creates and entails, we first have to start with the fact that these investments exist at all. And we first have to start with the fact that there is a second set of books that is evidenced by the CAFR. I'm going to play a clip from the 2010 documentary, which is a must watch, called Corporation Nation by Clint Richardson. And by the way, if anyone knows how to get a hold of him, please let me know. I'd love to have him on the show. In this clip, and I will link the video, by the way, it's a short interview with the U.S. Comptroller at the time. Now, the audio quality is not great in this particular clip, unfortunately, but it's so important I'm going to play it anyway. And in this clip, Clint is really going to highlight the fact that there are two sets of books.
Mr. Walker, those figures that you had up there, was that the taxpayer budget that you were referring to?
Which one are you talking about?
You had figures up there.
Yeah. Here.
What is that? What is that referring to?
Well, this is the size of the budget as a percentage of the economy. Okay. This
is the tax that's collected. Is it?
Here's the tax. Here's the taxes. Okay. Here's the one that has taxes. Okay. We had a $1.4 trillion deficit last year. We expect to have about $1.4 billion deficit this year. So I've got
a deficit in what? In the money
the difference
the federal
between the money
government collects?
The difference between what we pull in and what we pay.
As far as tax, or is that all revenue?
We spent last year this year we're estimating we're going to spend $3.5 trillion. All right.
That's total everything?
That's total everything. Okay. We're going to take in about $2.1 trillion in revenues. That's from corporate income taxes, personal income taxes, payroll taxes, fees, and all that kind of stuff.
So
right?
can you tell me the difference then between this and the comprehensive annual financial report, which shows trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that the government has?
Here's the difference.
Investments.
The difference is this is the budget, which is cash based.
In other words, money that comes from the taxpayer goes in, comes
It's
out.
cash based. It's not accrual based. And then the financial statements are accrual based.
So the former comptroller, his name is David Walker, is acknowledging two sets of books right there. He's acknowledging that the budget is cash based. That's cash in from taxes collected, and that's cash out for the services for that particular year. He states that the financial statements, which is the same thing as the CAFR, is accrual based. Well, based upon that statement, he's acknowledging two sets of books. First of all, how come the public is never made privy to this other set of books? How come we're not made privy, or we're not given input, or we're not shared with the risk associated with these other investments? And there's a whole new can of worms that this opens up. Because if the government that I reside in and I pay taxes for buys stock, and we'll say Apple, doesn't that entitle me to a dividend check for that particular quarter for my share? Or doesn't it entitle me to a particular a product, at least a portion of a product, like an Apple computer or an Apple Watch or whatever the case may be? And whatever the investment is, it really doesn't matter, because those investments are supposed to belong to the public. Except they don't belong to the public. They belong to the corporation.
Right? And so therefore, that's why you get the numbers like I talked about, 38 trillion for Medicare, 7.8 trillion, because the government accounts for it, cash in, cash out. They don't look at, on the budget doesn't look at the future obligations.
Right, but
they're
why isn't the comprehensive annual financial report actually shared with the people? I know it's a public document because all corporations.
Yeah, it comes out about December. Well, yeah, but it's not a corporation.
But it's kind of the best kept secret.
It comes out about December 15th of each year. This year it came out later. Mm-hmm. All right. It's something that we push on our website, pgpf.org. Not the actual report, because the actual report's about date. Nobody's going to read it. We do a citizen's guide to the State of the Union finances, graphics, charts, graph, bigger print. Pulls together numbers from here, right. Here, and here. Look at that.
Well, I guess my question really is, if say 2008 or 2007, government pulled in collectively, according to the Comprehensive Annual Financial Reports, which is the full budget, pulled in about $14 trillion, whereas the public, after taxation, pulled in about $5 trillion.
You're talking about the economy.
Okay, this is important because I've heard this become a point of contention in discussions that I've had in the past. Clint is saying that there's 185,000 government entities that are corporations. He's also stating that in 2007, the total net income, when you factor in all the CAFRs of all the different corporations, was like $14 trillion. I'm sure he would say that it's more now. But the point is, when you start to quibble over numbers, the discussion, in my opinion, gets lost. I don't know if it's 185,000. I don't know if it's 285,000 or 50,000, but that's really not the point. The point of the matter is that these quasi-government entities exist as money-making corporations. As far as the net income or net financial position, I've heard people say, well, that includes equipment and that includes things like building materials. And I've also heard people say, well, governments need rainy day funds. Of course, there's never a discussion and there's never a public debate or public disclosure of what those rainy day funds look like. But that isn't even the point. The point of the matter is that these government entities exist. These investments exist. There's risk associated with these investments. There's conflict of interest associated with these investments. And there's certainly market manipulation associated with these investments.
The whole United States, when you take into consideration all 185,000.
We're talking about the economy. Okay? The economy right now is about 14.5 trillion. That's the U.S. economy.
That's what the government pulls in.
No, that's not what the government.
Yes, it is. Actually, that's what they pulled in 2007. With taxation trillion. Plus all of the investments, your condos that you build in.
That's
in
the
Australia.
economy. That's not the government.
Well, what is the government doing with all of these investments? Why does the U.S. Why does the federal government own 95% of Nevada and 97% of Utah?
That's an issue of federal lands. Okay, federal mineral.
That's
an asset,
right?
That's correct. And you are correct in saying that that's not on the balance sheet. They don't value that because they have no intention to sell it. All right? I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just trying to explain it.
Is it the government's land or is it our land?
Well,
It's the people's land. Oh,
it's supposed to be.
Well, but if the government is a corporation and it's actually 185,000 different corporations, how is something that's owned by a corporation our land?
According to Clint in this clip, the federal government owns 95% of the state of Nevada and 97% of the state in Utah. I know this was a number of years ago. Of course, it might have changed. He might not even be right about it, but the former comptroller certainly didn't flinch. And as far as I'm concerned, if they own any of it, it should belong to the people and it shouldn't belong to a for-profit corporation. But then it gets even worse because the comptroller says because the government has no intention of ever selling it, it doesn't exist on the balance sheet. He even says they don't value it. So, I mean, just consider, if this is the people's land, how come I can't just walk on to a government land and set up shop? How long do you think that I'll last before they haul me out of there? And that kind of goes to show who really owns that land. And think about what would happen if they did sell it. Think about, I've heard 50%. We'll just call it 50%, that the federal government owns 50% of all the land in the United States. Can you imagine how they would crash the market? And just having the power to do so without the people's input is way too much power. That's way outside of the scope that was ever intended, according to what we're told anyway. Was the United States ever even really the Christian nation that we were told, or was it just brought to us by the Illuminati in the very beginning? Who knows? That's a different discussion. But let's just take a step back here for a second and think of this on a smaller scale. A HOA is a small scale corporation. And anyone that's belonged to an HOA or anyone that has any common sense knows you don't mess with an HOA in a legal battle. This is one of the reasons why I don't like HOAs, by the way. Why? Because they're getting their fees month after month after month, year after year after year. And they have the power of numbers associated with them. So if there's a dispute and there's a problem between an individual homeowner and an HOA, what happens? If it goes to court, the HOA, they can afford better lawyers. They have more resources. They have better representation. They have, obviously, the politics of the judges and the courts in their favor. They have more power, which is exactly how this works, except on a scale that's 100 times bigger than an HOA. So the notion that we're dead broke as a society, as a country, is one that I am calling into question based upon this conspiracy. In that clip, they discussed real estate. And I know that there'll be some that defend the United States owning so much real estate. You could say national parks. You could say for wildlife. You could say for natural resources. Maybe, I don't know that there's a defense there, but I can at least understand the argument. However, when you start getting into the stock purchases and the marrying of the public and the private, every defense gets thrown out the window, because now we're starting to move in the direction of fascism. And he'll talk about it in his video. I'm not going to go over it in this video, but if you buy enough stock in a particular corporation, you get proxy voting power. Can you imagine that a proxy voting government corporation votes to lay off 100,000 workers of a given corporation because it'll make their stock price go up, but those people are voting members of the public who committed the tax dollars into that stock purchase? We're going to talk a little bit about that based upon this next clip.
To a government-owned corporation. A government-owned corporation, state-owned enterprise, state enterprise, government business enterprise, or parastatal is a legal entity created by a government to undertake commercial activities on behalf of an owner government. Government-owned corporations can be fully owned or partially owned by government. As a definitional issue, it is difficult to determine categorically what level of state ownership would qualify an entity to be considered as state-owned, since governments can also own regular stock without implying any special interference. As an example, the Chinese Investment Corporation agreed in 2007 to acquire a 9.9% interest in the global investment bank Morgan Stanley, but it is unlikely that this would qualify the later as a government-owned corporation.
Wait a second now. Did he just say that governments can own stock without any special interference? Does anybody see anything wrong with this picture? Where do these governments get the money to buy this stock? And when was the last time you ever heard a public disclosure or a public discourse from an elected representative on the mechanism for purchasing this stock, the risks associated with it, the decision making associated with it, where the gains are going to go, how is it going to be tracked, the financial statements associated with the investments. What about the dividends associated with it? What about the ownership share associated with purchasing this stock? Does anybody see anything wrong with this? Never mind the backroom deals and the payoffs and the bribes and the kickbacks that I'm sure go on every day with this that no one even talks about. Next, he mentioned a Chinese government corporation that bought a large share of a major bank. You don't see any problem with national sovereignty there? What if the Chinese come in and buy 80% of the stock? What then? What would prevent a government entity, whether foreign or otherwise, from using their influence based upon their stock ownership to gain power against the people? From, I don't know, maybe shipping the jobs overseas to another country? Wait a second now, that already happened. I wonder why. Or maybe a retrenchment of banking lending policy, where even when we have zero interest rate policy, ZIRP, the credit card rates are still 22%. Oh, wait a second, that already happened too. And there's one more thing, and we're going to take the concept of the company line and we're going to turn it on its head. Because anytime a major company does something that contradicts the interests of the employees who built the company and who worked there and that of their families, we're told the company's responsibility is toward its shareholders. Well, wait a second. What if the shareholders are actually the members of the public who finance the stock that these quasi-government corporations purchased? And how's that for ownership society?
Government-owned or state-run enterprises are often the result of corporatization, a process in which government agencies and departments are reorganized as semi-autonomous corporate entities, sometimes with partial shares listed on stock exchanges. The term government-linked company, or GLC, is sometimes used to refer to corporate entities that may be private or public, listed on a stock exchange where an existing government owns a stake using a holding company.
An existing government owns a stake using a holding company. You know what that sounds like to me? A shell company. In other words, we want to try to cover up what we're doing, so we're going to use a shell company to make these stock purchases. And I'm focusing on the stock purchases right now, but it actually is far worse than that. We're talking about a perfectly diversified portfolio that includes all kinds of investments, even derivatives, which are among the most risky investments there are out there. Not that it matters because the public doesn't see any of the profit anyway.
Two main definitions of government-linked companies, which are dependent on the proportion of the corporate entity a government owns. One definition purports that a company is classified as a government-linked company if a government owns an effective controlling interest, greater than 50%, while the second definition suggests that any corporate entity that has a government as a shareholder is a government-linked corporation. The problem is, all corporations have the government as a major shareholder. Dow Jones has identified over 100,000 government-owned or controlled corporations in its anti-corruption service. This number far exceeds earlier estimates by the OECD. A quasi-governmental organization, corporation, business, or agency, parastatal, is an entity that is treated by national laws and regulations to be under the guidance of the government, but also separate and autonomous from the government. While the entity may receive some revenue from charging customers for its services, these organizations are often partially or majorly funded by the government. They are usually considered highly important to smooth running of society and are sometimes propped up with cash infusions or bailouts in times of crisis to help surmount situations that would bankrupt a normal, privately owned business. They may also possess law enforcement authority, usually related to their functions. In the United States, the government sponsored enterprises, or GSEs, are a group of financial services corporations created by the United States Congress. The United States government sponsored enterprises are private corporations owned by their stockholders, rather than government owned corporations. Their primary function is to generate profits for their stockholders, but they are structured and regulated by the U.S. government to enhance the availability and reduce the cost of credit to targeted borrowing sectors: agriculture, home finance, and education.
When he references the study about the 100,000 corporations, he's talking about in addition to the states, the cities, the towns, the districts, the counties, etc., etc. He's talking about all these shell corporations that they need to funnel and hide the money. That's what he's talking about right there. And are you starting to see that the notion that we have anything close to a free enterprise system is just a lie? It is completely fabricated. They have money to play the markets, but they can't even feed and house the population. Now, I mentioned I've been looking at these CAFRs for a number of years, and they become more and more obscure, and the numbers have changed too. I don't even trust the numbers anymore. It used to be that almost all of them were millions of dollars to the good. There's a lot of CAFRs now that you read that are negative. I find it difficult to trust. But this last clip is going to go through a CAFR that lists individual investments from the state of Florida. I believe the year was 2010. And you be the judge if this is something that the public should be investing in.
Now, in Florida's case, I decided to pull up not the actual comprehensive annual financial report, which would have just told you how much money it actually had, but in this case, Florida is one of the exceptional states that actually lists out its investment holdings in a long list. So, starting at page 1 of 1,479 pages of assets and investments held by the Florida state government, as listed in the Florida 2009 State Investment Holdings Report, the first page states, per the PFIA legislation, only publicly traded securities are included in this report. Privately held securities are not. So the following are just the investments that the state of Florida, the one individual government called the Florida state government, with its own individual CAFR, these are its investments in publicly traded companies. Now, I'm just going to go through pages of investments and read you some of the companies that you might recognize. Starting on page 101, we see that as of June 30th, 2010, the corporate government of the state of Florida owns $558,771,266 worth of Johnson & Johnson stock.
You ever wonder how the pharmaceutical industrial complex got so much power? That's number one. And number two, how is it that someone like me who doesn't believe in this nonsense can't opt out of paying for this pharmaceutical company's stock?
Here they have AT&T stock, $504.5 million. Here's Apple Computers, or Apple Incorporated, at $773.8 million in stock investments. Here's one that'll blow your mind. This is in the cash and temporary holdings category. Listed under Other, this is cash holdings, and it is listed at $6.7 billion. That right there is enough to pay off the budget crisis
that Florida states that it has, just with this extra little bit of cash that it lists in its comprehensive annual financial report, the state investment holdings for 2009. Not to mention all these other investments that are scattered throughout these 1,479 pages.
What he's referring to there, see, if it wasn't outrageous enough, a lot of these government entities claim to be broke because their budget may be upside down because they don't account for these investments. That's what he's talking about there. And I've seen this in a lot of CAFRs. This is the rainy day fund that is off books. Just the interest alone should be enough to give every resident a nice dividend check at the end of every quarter. I haven't received my dividend check from my state. How about you?
Also in cash and temporary, we have holdings in Japan. It doesn't really list what it is. It just says it's $39 million. Maybe it's yen.
So we're offshoring millions upon millions of dollars to foreign countries when we can't even feed our own people. We have families dying in the street. Real nice.
Investments, we have Abbott Laboratories, which is a pharmaceutical, at $210.8 million. For you World of Warcraft fans, Florida holds $17 million in stock investments in Activision and Blizzard, the company that makes your favorite game. Isn't it ironic that the very regulatory body that's supposed to rate video games for violence is the same government that has massive investments in the video game industry? Here's Adidas, the shoe and clothing company out of Germany, at $68.5 million. Advanced Auto Parts, an automotive retail chain, at $22.6 billion. How about Aetna? Managed healthcare at $49,685,000. African Bank Investments in South Africa, $16.3 million. Hey, why not? Gotta diversify, huh? Are you starting to understand that just a small amount of the money that governments have invested in corporations and foreign corporations could easily pay off the entire country's debt, let alone the state of Florida's? Here's a big one. Here's the Sony Corporation, listed under electronic appliances, at $29.4 million. Sprint Nextel, wireless telecommunications services, at $34.4 million. St. Jude Medical, a healthcare equipment provider, at $35.7 million. Staples Incorporated, specialty stores, at $65.6 million. Stanley Black & Decker household appliances at $24.8 million. State Street Corporation, listed as asset management and custody banks, at $55 million. Here's the State Bank of India for a total of $18.5 million. Suzuki Motor Company, land transportation, at $20.2 million. Swatch Group, the famous watchmakers of Switzerland, $21.7 million. Now you can see how strongly vested the state of Florida is in just about every possible industry and sub-industry in existence. I mean, look at these lists. Most of these are in the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, and a lot of them are in the millions. We even saw some that are in the billions. This is the money that the government called the state of Florida, the corporation acting as the government of Florida, has been earning off the taxpayer money it collects from you, invests, and then never gives you, the taxpayer, any of the profits.
So there it is. And I think that last part was very well said by Clint Richardson. I followed that guy for a number of years, and I don't know where he is now. I don't think his website is still active. I don't think his YouTube channel is still active. If anyone knows how to find him, please let me know. I think this corporate governance is one of the most important issues that no one is talking about. And I think we need to dive deeper into it, because this was just kind of like a surface level look to hopefully get the discussion started. This concludes the end of this episode. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment, share, and stay tuned for a bombshell episode coming up next. I have Justine DeVoe, former moderator, former long-term member of Vincent Rhodes's ministry. She's interviewing with me to give her experience on who Vincent Rhodes and who Dean Odle really are. That episode will be out within the next day. Coming after that, we have our Mandela Effect Primer episode. That will be episode 8 coming up within the next week. Thank you for watching. We will see you soon.